In this video, I'll show you my method for squaring my lumber with power woodworking tools. Hi, I'm Joshua Farnsworth. Welcome to my traditional woodworking school here in Earlysville, Virginia. Quite a few years ago, I made a video on squaring up lumber with woodworking hand tools, and it got really popular. Since then, I've had a lot of people ask me to also make and share a video on my process for squaring lumber with power tools. Because I need a lot of lumber squared up here, I typically turn to my woodworking machines for that job. Using hand tools to square up my huge volume of lumber would just take too long. But when I want to cut joinery or when I've got a board that's too wide for my machinery, I'll usually use hand tools, and I love it. I find this is a good mix for me, but of course there's no right or wrong, it's just your personal preference. So I hope this helps you. So let's get started. For this dovetail box project, I'll first use my bandsaw to rip this board to a fairly uniform width, somewhat close to my final required width. Here I want to keep as much width as I can, so I'm just removing the rough edge. I'll next resaw this wider board in half on the bandsaw to get two boards that match. It's important to use a fence and bandsaw blade that are intended for resawing. I'll share the specifics of my blade and fence in the notes below this video, along with all the other machinery and accessories that I use in this video. For safety purposes, I use a scrap board to push the end of the board through the blade. The resulting two boards here are referred to as book matched because it gives you two boards with similar looking grain. Now I take the boards to my power jointer. I adjust the fence and guard to the approximate size of my boards so I can stay safe. My felder machine uses a European guard, which allows me to use my bare hands to push the board over the cutter head. I repeat this until the board shows no more signs of rough wood. If you have a swinging guard, like on many jointers common in the United States, then make sure you always use paddles to protect your hands. Now that I have a perfectly flat board face, I flip the face up against the fence. I adjust the guard for safety. Then I run the edge of the board over the cutter heads. I make sure that I keep the flattened face flat up against the jointer's fence. And I keep jointing the edge until it's cut all the way from start to finish. The board edges should now be a perfect 90-degree angle to the flattened faces. The next step is to take the boards to a thickness planer, or in my case, I flip the top up to use the planer configuration. I put the flattened face downward on the table and push a button to advance the planer base up toward the cutter head. I keep moving the base up a little at a time until the rollers grab onto the thickest board and pull it through. I sand through all the boards that I want to plane. And then I keep raising the base up a bit each time, and I keep sending all the boards through on each new thickness setting. And when I finally reached my desired thickness on all the boards, I stop the machine. Now that all my boards are the same thickness, I take them to the table saw for ripping to final width. I set the width that I want on the table saw's fence and lock it down. This will ensure that all of my boards will be ripped to the exact same width. Then I set the table saw blade to a height that's just slightly higher than the thickness of my board. You can see the zero clearance insert around the blade that will lead to a cleaner cut. And that riving knife behind the blade will help prevent a dangerous kickback by preventing the newly cut parts of your board from closing up and pinching the blade. I turn on the dust extractor and then I turn on the table saw blade. This is where you need to be extra careful, even if you have a saw stop table saw like this. I always keep my hands away from the red area unless I'm using a push stick. And I make sure that my jointed edge is running tightly against the fence. Once the wood is at this point, I grab my push stick and push it the rest of the way through the blade. I repeat this step for all of the boards. Now that all the boards are the same exact thickness and width, I'm ready to move on to the last step, cutting the boards to the same length. There are several ways to cut a board to length, but the most common is to use a miter gauge. Most table saws come with a miter gauge. After ensuring that the gauge is square to the blade with a combination square and test cuts, I first cut off an end that may have an imperfection that I want to get rid of, like this knot. Notice how I never put my hand near the blade to grab the cutoff piece until it's fully stopped. Next, I mark the final length of my first board using a folding rule or tape measure and make a tick mark. I set a stop block against my fence and butt my board's freshly cut edge against it. I look down over the blade and move the fence back and forth to line the board up so it will cut right where I want. I lock the fence in place and then move the stop block way back to the back of the fence and clamp it in place. Then I slide my board's freshly cut edge back against the clamped stop block. This block not only allows me to perfectly repeat the same cut on the other boards, but it also helps to prevent my board from binding against the fence, which could be dangerous. I proceed to cut all the pieces that need to be that particular size, making sure I hold my board tightly against the miter gauge and the saw's table. Again, notice how the end of the board isn't touching the fence during the cut. In this case, I'm building a rectangular dovetailed box, so I want two of the sides to be longer than the ones that I just cut. So I repeat the process to measure and cut these to my longer dimension. And here are all four pieces of the box nicely squared up and cut to the right lengths. So that's how I mill up my lumber with power tools. Having such nicely dimensioned boards will make it much easier for me to build this lovely dovetailed box. Some people dimension their lumber a bit differently than I do. If so, I would love you to comment below and share your tips or mention something that I may have forgotten in this video. Again, make sure you subscribe to my channel below if you want to see my upcoming box build video, and don't forget to click the notification bell and give this video a quick thumbs up if you liked it. It really helps me out and it only takes you a second. I'll see you next time here in my shop. Hi, I'm Joshua Farnsworth. If you like this video, I've got a whole bunch of other free woodworking videos and articles at my website, which you can visit by clicking right here. You'll go to woodandshop.com. Down here, if you click, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. And over here are some really great other videos that I think you might like to check out.